I don't know how long this podcast is going to last. You have the benefit of seeing the end result. When I start these things, I generally know how long they're going to last, but this one is different because this is a big topic. And I've titled it Spinoza the Nihilist because Spinoza, if you read the Ethics and his other works, you'll realize that Spinoza is about transcendence. This is really what he's about, transcending our own limited little view on the world and on things, and transcending the dualities that our mind creates. I don't like the term non-duality, even though I've used it in this document that is attached to this podcast, and I should mention that now. There is a document and you will need it if you want to follow the text and the arguments, because I've extracted a huge amount from the appendix to part 1 of the Ethics. This is to kind of round off part 1. The term non-duality, of course, immediately creates a duality, so I don't tend to use it, but Spinoza is really talking about transcending duality of pain, pleasure, good, bad, beauty, ugliness, and so on. Because as he says right at the beginning of the improvement of the understanding, he realized that things in themselves had no real qualities other than the way our minds attribute qualities to things. So the issue is in our mind, not in the things in themselves. So is the rotting carcass of a dead cat at the side of the road with its intestines hanging out less beautiful than a rose? Well, most people would say yes, but Spinoza would say no. In fact, as I mentioned in the previous podcast, for Spinoza there is no beauty or ugliness. He says that in a few places. I may do a podcast just on that because he does mention it in a few places in a couple of his works. So this podcast is going to be fairly long, and I'm going to go through a lot of what are very central issues in Spinoza's work around this transcending of duality, life, death, all the dualities that we carry around with us, because we are mortal and finite creatures driven by one particular thing, which is the desire to persist in our existence, and things that serve that we see as good, things that work against it we see as bad, and so we are trapped in duality because of the nature of our existence in our minds. But through reason, Spinoza believes, as have other people, that we can transcend these realities. Well, these dualities, sorry. So, remember, please download the document. Right at the beginning of this document, I've summarized in just a few points some of the major themes in part 1 of the Ethics. The first one is that the essence of God is existence. It's a little bit like saying that the essence of existence is existence. Spinoza's not adding any qualities to God, or nature with a capital N, the power behind existence. He is simply saying that stuff exists, and this existence is the power of God. He's not saying that it's good, that it's beautiful, that it's ordered, any of those things. He's just saying there is existence. And if you judge it from your own perspective, you will see duality. And if you can rise above your own perspective, then those dualities and a lot of the pains associated with those dualities will disappear. I mean, they never completely disappear, but they're less of an influence on your life. And Spinoza's attributes of extension and thought, well, he assigns those to God. And there's Yeah, as per usual, there's rabbit holes all over the place here, but when we get onto Kant, you will see that those map directly to Kant's sensibility and understanding. We sense things and we think. End of story. And as Spinoza says in somewhere, it might be a different work to the ethics, but he says if there are other things, they are less well known to us, i.e. not known at all. So we sense things, which is Spinoza's extension, and we think things, which is thought. And the fact that Kant sees those as properties of our own particular constitution, but Spinoza sees those as attributes of God, doesn't really matter, in my opinion. God, nature, acts necessarily. See, Spinoza isn't saying that God, nature, is something that acts with volition. I'll have one of those, I don't want one of those, oh, let's make that pretty, or, all that kind of thing. There's none of that going on. There's no spirit in the sky making decisions and doing stuff. It all just happens. Or, to use Spinoza's words, God acts necessarily from the nature of her own being. So it all unfolds in a quite natural way. There's no need to add any great theories on top of it as to why it's happening, because there is no why, it's just happening. And as for ourselves, our central issue is that our bodies, at least, are temporary manifestations, modes, Spinoza would call it, in time. But then you have to ask the question, what are we outside of time? And that question will become very, very important when we study Kant. Because as Kant says, time is our inner sense. It's how we perceive ourselves. We don't actually perceive ourselves in reality. We only perceive ourselves through time, just as we only perceive objects through space. It's our mode of representation. Anyway, this is not about Kant, but and then we come to a masterwork in its own right, the appendix to part 1, and this is going to take a long time. I've included probably at least 60 or 70% of the appendix. And when I first read this, it was like a slap in the face every other sentence. It was just wonderful, a wonderful experience. And I still go back to it an awful lot, because as Deleuze says, here Spinoza has taken his gloves off. He's not hiding his meaning behind geometrical construction, as is the main construct of the ethics, and he's not hiding behind religious talk. He's just giving it straight. So let's begin. Maybe you should get a coffee or something. I'm going to take breaks during this because this is going to be quite an effort and quite a long podcast. So, now all the prejudices which I intend to mention here turn on this one point. Note that, just one point. So the whole of the appendix is really about elaborating this one point. The widespread belief among men that all things in nature, nature with a capital N, are like themselves in acting with an end in view. Because we always act with an end in view. Even a seemingly innocent activity like this has an end in view. The end is to gain more understanding. We go to work to make money. We seduce someone for sex, maybe. We eat an ice cream for pleasure. There's always an end in view. It's the way our lives are shaped, but what Spinoza is saying implicitly here, but explicitly a little bit later, that nature, God, does not act with an end in view. If we want to understand the world and nature, we have to really, really let it sink in that God, nature, just exists and unfolds according to its own nature. And there is no end in view. Very, very beautiful, really, if you get the gist of it. Indeed, they hold it as certain that God himself directs everything to a fixed end. It's almost a blasphemy to think that. It takes away all the beauty. You know, there's a great podcast on YouTube somewhere of, I might try and dig it out actually, but of Osho talking about play. Play has no fixed end in view. When children play, they just play. There's no, I'm going to play because I want to achieve so-and-so. They just play. We could see the universe as play. In fact, there's a very beautiful book by a guy called Valentin, I think that's his name, where he's talking about liberation really is a movement from directed activity to play. Anyway, that's a deep topic, but let me get back to this. So indeed they hold it as certain that God himself directs everything to a fixed end. God does not direct anything to a fixed end, because God is just a natural unfolding, and we could say is playing. There's no end in view. For they say that God has made everything for man's sake, and has made man so that he should worship God. So this is the first point I shall consider, seeking the reason why most people are victims of this prejudice, and why all are so naturally disposed to accept it. Well, we don't passively accept it, we want to believe that everything has an end in view, and particularly an end that is good for us, because this is the way we view the world from our own tiny little perspective. So, carrying on, I shall show how it has been the source of misconceptions about good and bad, right and wrong, praise and blame, order and confusion, beauty and ugliness, and the like. In other words, Spinoza is saying here that this notion that everything has some kind of end in view then creates all these dualities. As I say, talking about duality then creates the idea of non-duality, and you've got another duality, but if we want to transcend duality, then we have to get outside of our own little frame of reference. However, it is not appropriate here to demonstrate the origin of these misconceptions from the nature of the human mind. So, Spinoza is saying that these misconceptions are a natural outcome of the nature of our mind. Well, clearly they are, because our mind is striving to persist all the time, and so we see everything from the point of view of whether it's advantageous or disadvantageous. It will suffice at this point if I take as my basis what must be universally admitted, that all men are born ignorant of the causes of things. We're not born with an instruction manual. We're not born with the information on why we are, why the universe is, how things work. We're born totally ignorant of causes. All men are born ignorant of the causes of things, that they all have a desire to seek their own advantage, a desire of which they are conscious. So we're ignorant of causes, and we are driven, little robots, to persist in our existence, or as he says, a desire to seek our own advantage. From this it follows, firstly, that men believe that they are free, precisely because they are conscious of their volitions and desires. And this is the free will thing. We're all conscious of, oh, I want an ice cream. I'm going to have an ice cream. That's my decision. It's a free decision. And this is the way most people think. And I've been through this before, but people believe they have free will, and it's the most damaging thing. Because then you have all these notions such as good and bad and guilty and innocent and so on and so forth. If we can just accept that we are, as Spinoza says, spiritual automata, then all those things go away. So I'll repeat that. It will suffice at this point if I take as my basis what must be universally admitted, that all men are born ignorant of the causes of things, that they have a desire to seek their own advantage, a desire of which they are conscious. From this it follows, firstly, that men believe that they are free, precisely because they are conscious of their volitions and desires. Yet concerning the causes that have determined them to desire and will, they do not think, not even dream about, because they are ignorant of them. This is the way we all live our lives. We're totally ignorant of the things that are driving us. Secondly, men act always with an end in view, to wit, the advantage that they seek. Hence it happens that they are always looking only for the final causes of things done, and are satisfied when they find them, having, of course, no reason for further doubt. So if we can understand why something is happening, then we're happy. So religions would say, oh well, and maybe Gurdjieff would say, oh well, the universe is being created, or the cosmos is being created because God needs it to feed himself. There's some kind of argument like that, which, as far as I'm concerned, is total nonsense. But who knows? It might be true, but we don't know. But this need to assign causes, the final causes, the reason why something is done, is at the very, very root of us. And yet, in reality, in the wide reality of the whole of existence, there is no final cause. There is just existence. So we're happy when we find a final cause. But if they fail to discover them, so fail to discover final causes, if they fail to discover them from some external source, then they have no recourse but to turn to themselves and to reflect on what ends would normally determine them to similar actions, and so they necessarily judge other minds by their own. It's often said, if you want to understand someone, then just listen to what they say about other people. So if someone is always saying that, these people are cheats and liars and blah blah blah, then you can be fairly certain that they are cheats and liars. Or if they're saying this person is an immoral scoundrel or something, then the person who's saying that is like that. Because we always assign final causes to other people and things that are natural to us. That's what we do. Further, since they find within themselves and outside themselves a considerable number of means, we're already at 20 minutes and I haven't got anywhere with this, so I'm going to speed up. A considerable number of means very convenient for the pursuit of their own advantage, as for instance eyes for seeing, teeth for chewing, cereals and living creatures for food, the sun for giving light, and the sea for breeding fish. The result is that they look on all the things of nature as means to their own advantage. And realizing that these were found, not produced by them, they come to believe that there is someone else who produced these means for their use. Isn't that the way that we work? You know, something beneficial happens. It's because something or someone has delivered this to us, has looked upon us favorably. You know, this is the whole pathetic thing about people pleading to God for this, that or the other, and if it happens to happen, oh, God has looked upon me favorably. Or if it doesn't happen, oh, God must be displeased, or some kind of nonsense like that. For looking on things as means, they could not believe them to be self-created. Strange statement, which I still do not understand. I understand it at one level, but it would be too much of a digression to go into it. But anyway, for looking on things as means, they could not believe them to be self-created, but on the analogy of the means which they are accustomed to produce for themselves, they were bound to conclude that there was some governor or governors of nature endowed with human freedom, who have attended to all their needs and made everything for their use. Oh, we think we're so important in the universe. We think the whole fucking universe is there to serve our needs. And to look upon everything as a means is a violence, instead of looking upon it as an end in its own right. It's not there as a means. It's not a final cause. There's no final cause for those flowers. They're just there as an end in their own right. Same with, the dead cat at the side of the road. It's an end in its own right. This is brutal stuff. I may come back to this at some point and do a more detailed treatment, but let me continue. So it came about that every individual devised different methods of worshipping God as he thought fit, in order that God should love him beyond others and direct the whole of nature so as to serve his blind cupidity and insatiable greed. Oh my goodness. I was once convinced to go to a church while I was living in London. I think I went twice. Talk about blind cupidity and insatiable greed, and the belief that we can direct the whole of nature to serve this. So people were getting up, and I remember one woman getting up and saying, she worked in a bank, and it was at a time when they were laying, it was around about 2008, they were laying lots of people off, and she said, I pray to God that our department wouldn't be laid off. And it hasn't been laid off. The department down the corridor's been laid off. Of course, no feeling for all those people down the corridor who got laid off. Thus it was that this misconception developed into superstition and became deep-rooted in the minds of men. And it was for this reason that every man strove most earnestly to understand and explain the final causes of all things. We're desperate for these final causes. God, this has happened because God was angry, or this has happened because we are putting plastic into the ocean, or this has happened because, whatever. Always looking for final causes, the reason something has taken place. There is no need to spend time in going on to show that nature has no fixed goal. Nature with a capital N, God, has no fixed goal, and that all final causes are but figments of the human imagination. I hope you're getting the gist of this, because it is immensely freeing. But I will make this additional point, that this doctrine of final causes turns nature completely upside down, for it regards as an effect that which is in fact a cause, and vice versa. This is a really important point. So when we talk about final causes, what we say is that God or nature is doing this for this. So what we're interested in is the effects. So it's the end result that we're interested in, the effect. And then the cause of that just becomes secondary. It's the effect that we're after. But what Spinoza is saying that turns the whole thing upside down, because actually the cause is the important thing. The effects are neither here nor there. There is no the effect is not some kind of final cause. That effect did not happen for a designed and deliberate reason. It's a difficult point to grasp, but it's an important one. Again, it makes that which is by nature first to be last, and finally that which is highest and most perfect is held to be the most imperfect. Because we suddenly make God a slave of final causes, of the effects. But if the things produced directly by God were brought about to enable him to attain an end, then of necessity the last things for the sake of which the earlier things were brought about would excel all others. So this is the point I've been making. Again, this doctrine negates God's perfection, for if God acts with an end in view, he must necessarily be seeking something that he lacks. And so they will go on, asking the causes of causes, until you take refuge in the will of God. That is the sanctuary of ignorance. The will of God, the sanctuary of ignorance. Why is it a sanctuary of ignorance? Because God does not have a will. God is not making volitions. God acts necessarily. So we're always looking for a reason. Why has this happened? Why is that? There is no reason. It's just a natural unfolding. There's no final cause. There are chains of cause and effect, but there's no reason. There's no end result that's being looked for. Similarly, when they consider the structure of the human body, they are astonished. And being ignorant of the causes of such skillful work, they conclude that it is fashioned not by mechanical art. Mechanical art. Beautiful, beautiful term. But by divine or supernatural art. And so, because people are looking for explanations all the time, and they're looking for final cause, then our bodies are being designed by God. A supernatural art, instead of a mechanical art, which is an unfolding, no purpose, no reason, it just happens to have unfolded like this, and is so arranged that no one part shall injure another. As a result, he who seeks the true causes of miracles and is eager to understand the works of nature as a scholar, the works of God as a scholar, and not just gape at them like a fool, is universally considered an impious heretic and denounced by those to whom the common people bow down as interpreters of nature and the gods. Well, who are acting these days as the interpreters of nature? The fucking scientists. Lawrence Krauss, Dawkins, Tyson. They stand there like priests talking about the beauty and the majesty and all the rest of it, giving us their interpretation. I don't want it. I don't want their interpretation. And of course, in previous ages, it was the priests and whoever else. For these people know that the dispelling of ignorance would entail the disappearance of that astonishment, which is the one and only support for their argument and for safeguarding their authority. When men become convinced that everything that is created on their behalf, they were bound to consider as the most important quality in every individual thing that which was most useful to them. That's the way we work. Is this useful or not? Very tiny point of view of the universe and of the world and of nature. Is it useful to me or not? And to regard as the highest excellence all those things by which they were most benefited. Hence they came to form these abstract notions to explain the nature of things: good, bad, order, confusion, hot, cold, beauty, ugliness. And since they believe that they are free, the following abstract notions came into being: praise, blame, right, wrong. Oh my God, we're so screwed up. We're in such a tiny little place. You know, we look out on the world and this is wrong and this is right, this is beautiful, this is ugly, this is ordered, this is confused. All from our own tiny little perspective. And yet if we use reason, we can go beyond that perspective. So he continues, all that conduces to well-being and to the worship of God they call good, and the contrary bad. And since those who do not understand the nature of things but only imagine things, 30 minutes already, and I'm definitely going to tie this up at 40 minutes, but I've talked about imagination before. Reasoning is not imagining. Understanding and reasoning is not imagining. So, and since those who do not understand, important word, the nature of things, but only imagine things, make no affirmative judgments about things themselves, and mistake their imagination for intellect, they are firmly convinced that there is order in things, ignorant as they are of things and their own nature. We look for order, and so he goes on to say, for when things are in such arrangement that being presented to us through our senses we can readily picture them, and thus readily remember them, we say that they are well arranged. If the contrary, we say that they are ill arranged or confused. Our own tiny little perspective again. And since those things we can readily picture we find pleasing compared with other things, men prefer order to confusion, as though there were something in as though order were something in nature other than what is relative to our imagination. I think I mentioned on the last podcast that Spinoza says there is no order in nature. We impose the order on it, you know, for our tiny little perspective. Oh, look at those flowers I raised. They're arranged all nice and orderly. And then you look at a meadow and there is no order, but it's beautiful all the same. And they say that God has created all things in an orderly way without realizing that they are thus attributing human imagination to God. Unless perchance they mean that God, out of consideration for the human imagination, arranged all things in the way that men could most easily imagine. And perhaps they will find no obstacle in the fact that there are any number of things that far surpass our imagination, and a considerable number that confuse the imagination because of its weakness. He's being a bit cutting here, isn't he? I like it. So, to go on. Other notions too are nothing but modes of imagining, whereby the imagination is affected in various ways, and yet the ignorant consider them as important attributes of things because they believe, as I have said, that all things were made on their behalf. And they call a thing's nature good or bad, healthy or rotten, and corrupt according to its effect on them. Do the bankers think the banking system is corrupt and rotten? No, they don't, because it benefits them. For instance, if the motion communicated to our nervous system by objects presented through our eyes is conducive to our feeling of well-being, the objects which are its cause are said to be beautiful, while the objects which provoke a contrary motion are called ugly. Yeah, dead, mutilated fetuses are ugly because they remind us of death. Whereas a nice bunch of flowers we call beautiful because it's life-affirming. Those things that we sense through the nose are called fragrant or fetid. Through the tongue, sweet or bitter, tasty or tasteless. Those that we sense by touch are called hard or soft, rough or smooth, and so on. Of course, this is all totally subjective. This is our, as I mentioned a few podcasts ago, this is our virtual reality hood that we've got over our heads. Finally, those that we sense through our ears are said to give forth noise, sound or harmony, the last of which has driven men to such madness that they used to believe that even God delights in harmony. Because we delight in harmony, we believe God has to delight in harmony. Some nice egotistical projection there. There are philosophers who have convinced themselves that the motions of the heavens give rise to harmony. All this goes to show that everyone's judgment is a function of the disposition of his brain, or rather that he mistakes for reality the way his imagination is affected. Fantastic stuff. We see therefore that all the notions whereby the common people are wont to explain nature are merely modes of imagining, and denote not the nature of anything but only the constitution of the imagination. Because these notions have names as if they were the names of entities existing independently of the imagination, I call them entities of imagination rather than entities of reason. So all arguments drawn from such notions against me can easily be refuted. For many are wont to argue on the following lines. If everything has followed from the necessity of God's most perfect nature, why does nature display so many imperfections, such as rottenness to the point of putridity, nauseating ugliness, confusion, evil, sin, and so on? But as I have pointed out, they are easily refuted, for the perfection of things should be measured solely from their own nature and power. Nor are things more or less perfect to the extent that they please or offend human senses, serve or oppose human interests. So when the sun balloons out, explodes in, I think it's 2 billion years from now, and fries the planet, that's obviously not good for life on this planet, but, and as such doesn't serve our interests, but in itself, it's a perfect expression. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with Stalin killing, exterminating, executing 20 million people in the last century. As to those who seek why God did not create men in such a way that they should be governed solely by reason, I make only this reply: that he lacked not material for creating all things from the highest to the lowest degree of perfection. As I mentioned, there is in several places in Spinoza's works, he says that what we would view as evil and wicked is the work of God. More mature religions have that view, that destruction is part of the game just as much as creation. Anyway, I make this reply that he lacked not material for creating all things from the highest to the lowest degree of perfection, or to speak more accurately, The laws of his nature were so comprehensive as to suffice for the production of everything that can be conceived by an infinite intellect. If you can think of something that is wholly for you, abhorrent, wicked, evil, then that possibility will come to exist. Just the way it is. You know, when you take an antibiotic, all the bacteria in your body have a really bad time. But you hopefully get better. Anyway, at that point, I'm going to wind this up. I guess you'll have to listen to it a couple of times, maybe. There's so much in there, but I love every sentence of it. Anyway, thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting this channel.